Day 5, 9:10 p.m. Julia's convertible had gone off the road about 5 miles from the house. It had plunged 50 feet down a steep ravine, cutting a track through the sage and juniper bushes. Then it must have rolled, because now it lay at an angle, wheels facing upward. I could see only the underside of the car. The sun was down and the ravine was dark. The 3 rescue ambulances on the road had their red lights flashing, and the rescue crews were already rappelling down on ropes. As I watched, portable floodlights were set up, bathing the wreck in a harsh blue glow. I heard the crackle of radios all around. I stood up on the road with a motorcycle police officer. I had already asked to go down there, and was told I couldn't. I had to stay on the road. When I heard the radios, I said, "Is she hurt? Is my wife hurt?" "We'll know in a minute." He was calm. "What about the other guy?" "Just a minute," he said. He had a headset in his helmet, because he just started talking in a low voice. It sounded like a lot of code words. I heard, "Update of 402-4739 here." I stood at the edge and looked down, trying to see. By now there were workers all around the car, and several hidden behind the upturned frame. A long time seemed to pass. The cop said, "Your wife is unconscious, but she was wearing her seatbelt and stayed in the car. They think she's alright. Vital signs are stable. They say no spinal injuries, but she sounds like she broke her arm. But she's alright. They think so." Another pause while he listened. I heard him say, "I have the husband here, so let's 8-7. When he turned back to me, he said, "Yes, she's coming around. She'll have to be checked for internal bleeding at the hospital. And she's got a broken arm. But they say she's alright. They're getting her on a stretcher now." "Thank God," I said. The policeman nodded. "This is a bad piece of road." This has happened before?" He nodded. "Every few months. Not usually so lucky." I flipped open my cell phone and called Ellen. Told her to explain to the kids there was nothing to worry about. That Mom was going to be okay. Especially Nicole, I said. "I'll take care of it," Ellen promised me. I flipped the phone shut and turned back to the cop. "What about the other guy?" I said. "She's alone in the car." "No," I said. "There was another guy with her." He spoke on his headset, then turned back to me. "They say no. There's no sign of anyone else." "Maybe he was thrown," I said. "They're asking your wife now." He listened a moment. She says she was alone." "You're kidding," I said. He looked at me, shrugged. "That's what she says." In the flashing red lights of the ambulances, I couldn't read his expression, but his tone implied another guy who doesn't know his own wife. I turned away, looked over the edge of the road. One of the rescue vehicles had extended a steel arm with a wrench that hung over the ravine. A cable was being lowered. I saw the workers struggling for footing against the steep slope. As they attached a Stretcher to the winch. I couldn't see Julia clearly on the stretcher. She was strapped down, covered in a silver space blanket. She started to rise, passing through the cone of blue light, then into darkness. The cop said, "They're asking about drugs and medicines. Is your wife taking any drugs or medicines?" "Not that I know of." "How about alcohol? What she's drinking?" "Wine at dinner. 1 or 2 glasses." The cop turned away and spoke again. Quietly in the darkness, after a pause, I heard him say, "That's affirmative." The stretcher twisted slowly as it rose into the air. One of the workers, halfway up the slope, reached out to steady it. The stretcher continued upward. I still couldn't see Julia clearly. Until it reached the level of the road, and the rescue workers strung it around and clipped it from the line. She was swollen. Her left cheekbone was purple and the forehead above her left eye was purple as well. She must have hit her head pretty hard. She was breathing shallowly. I moved alongside the stretcher. She saw me and said, "Jack," and tried to smile. "Just take it easy," I said. She gave a little cough. "Jack, it was an accident." The medics were maneuvering around the motorcycle. I had to watch where I was going. Of course it was. "It's not what you think, Jack." I said, "What is, Julia?" She seemed to be delirious. Her voice seemed to drift in and out. "I know what you're thinking." Her hand gripped my arm. "Promise me you won't get involved in this, Jack." I didn't say anything. I just walked with her. She squeezed me harder. "Promise me you'll stay out of it." "I promise," I said. She relaxed then, dropping my arm. "This doesn't involve our family. The kids will be fine. You'll be fine. Just stay out, okay?" "Okay," I said, just wanting to mollify her. "Jack." "Yes, honey, I'm here." By now, we were approaching the nearest ambulance. The doors swung open. One of the rescue team said, "You related to her?" "I'm her husband." "You want to come?" "Yes." "Hop in." I got into the ambulance first. Then they slid the stretcher in. One of the rescue team got in and slammed the doors shut. We started down the road, sirens moaning. I was immediately moved aside by the 2 paramedics working on her. One was recording notes on a handheld device, and the other was starting a second IV in her other arm. They were worried about her blood pressure, which was dropping. That was a great cause for concern. During all this, I couldn't really see Julia, but I heard her murmuring. I tried to move forward, but the medics pushed me back. "Let us work, sir. Your wife's got injuries. We have to work." For the rest of the way, I sat on a little jump seat and gripped a wall handle as the ambulance careened around curves. By now, Julia was clearly delirious, babbling nonsense. I heard something about the black clouds that were not black anymore. Then she shifted into a kind of lecture, talking about adolescence rebellion. She mentioned Amanda by name and Eric, asking if they were all right. She seemed agitated. The medics kept trying to reassure her, and finally she lapsed into repeating, "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't mean to do anything wrong," as the ambulance sped through the night. Listening to her, I couldn't help but worry. The examination suggested Julia's injuries might be more extensive than they first thought. There was a lot to rule out. Possible pelvic fracture, possible hematoma, possible fracture of the cervical vertebra, left arm broken in 2 places, and might need to be pinned. The doctors seemed most worried about her pelvis. They were handling her much more gingerly when they put her into intensive care. But Julia was conscious, catching my eye and smiling at me from time to time, until she fell asleep. The doctors said there was nothing for me to do. They would wake her up every half hour during the night. They said that she would be in the hospital at least 3 days, probably a week. They told me to get some rest. I left the hospital a little before midnight. I took a taxi back to the crash site to pick up my car. It was a cold night. The police cars and rescue ambulances were gone. In their place was a big flatbed tow truck, which was winching Julia's car up the hill. A skinny guy smoking a cigarette was running the winch. "Nothing to see," he said to me. "Everybody's gone to the hospital." I said it was my wife's car. "Can't drive it," he said. He asked me for my insurance card. I got it out of my wallet and handed it to him. He said, "I heard your wife's okay, so far. You're a lucky guy." He jerked his thumb, pointing across the road. "Are they with you?" Across the street, a small white van was parked. The sides were bare, with no markings or company logo. But low on the front door, I saw a serial number in black, and underneath it said SSVT unit. I said, "No, they're not with me." "Been here an hour," he said, "just sitting there." I couldn't see anyone inside the van. The front windows were dark. I started across the street towards them. I heard the faint crackle of a radio. When I was about 10 feet away, the lights came on. The engine started, and the van roared past me and drove down the highway. As it passed, I had a glimpse of the driver. He was wearing a shiny suit of some kind, like silvery plastic, and a tight hood of the same material. I thought I saw some funny silver apparatus hanging around his neck. It looked like a gas mask, except it was silver, but I wasn't sure. As the car drove away, I noticed the rear bumper had 2 green stickers, each with a big X. That was the Zymos logo, but it was the license plate that really caught my eye. It was a Nevada plate. That van had come from the fabrication plant out in the desert. I frowned. It was time for me to visit the fab plant, I thought. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Tim Bergman. I told him I had reconsidered his offer and I would take the consulting job after all. "That's great," Tim said. "Don will be very happy." "Great," I said. How soon can I start? Desert. Day 6, 7:12 a.m. With the vibration of the helicopter, I must have dozed off for a few minutes. I awoke and yawned, hearing voices in my headphones. They were all men speaking. Well, what exactly is the problem? A growling voice. Apparently, the plant released some material into the environment. It was an accident. Now, several dead animals have been found out in the desert, in the vicinity of the plant. A reasonable, organized voice. Who found them? Growly. Couple of nosy environmentalists. They ignored the keep out signs, snooped around the plant. They've complained to the company and are demanding to inspect the plant, which we can't allow. No. How do we handle this? Said a timid voice. I say we minimize the amount of contamination released, and give data that show no untoward consequences possible. Organized voice. Hell, I wouldn't play it that way, said growling voice. We're better off flatly denying it. Nothing was released. I mean, what's the evidence? Anything was released. Well, the dead animals, a coyote, some desert rats, maybe a few birds. Hell, animals die in nature all the time. I mean, remember the business about those slash cows? It was supposed to be aliens from UFOs that were slashing the cows. Finally, turned out the cows were dying of natural causes, and it was decomposing gas in the carcasses that split them open. Remember that. Vaguely, timid voice. I'm not sure we can just deny. Fuck yes, deny. Aren't there pictures? I think the environmentalists took pictures. Well, who cares? What would the pictures show? A dead coyote? No, nobody's going to get worked up about a dead coyote. Trust me, pilot. Pilot, where the fuck are we? I opened my eyes. I was sitting in the front of the helicopter, alongside the pilot. The helicopter was flying east into the glare of low morning sun. Beneath my feet, I saw mostly flat terrain, with low clumps of cactus, juniper, and the occasional scraggly Joshua tree. The pilot was flying alongside the power line towers that marched in single file across the desert, a steel army with outstretched arms. The towers cast long shadows in the morning light. A heavy-set man leaned forward from the back seat. He was wearing a suit and tie. Pilot, are we there yet? We just crossed the Nevada line. Another 10 minutes. The heavy-set man grunted and sat back. I'd met him when we took off, but I couldn't remember his name now. I glanced back at the three men, all in suits and ties, who were traveling with me. They were all PR consultants hired by Xymos. I could match their appearance to their voices. A slender, nervous man, twisting his hands. Then a middle-aged man with a briefcase on his lap. And the heavy-set man, older and growly, obviously in charge. Why the hell did they put it in Nevada anyway? Fewer regulations, easier inspections. These days, California is sticky about new industry. There was going to be a year's delay just for environmental impact statements, in a far more difficult permitting process. So they came here. Crowley looked out the window at the desert. What a shithole, he said. I don't give a fuck what goes on out here. It's not a problem. He turned to me. What do you do? I'm a computer programmer. You covered by an NDA? He meant, did I have a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing what I had just heard? Yes, I said. You coming out to work at the plant to consult? I said, yes. Consulting's the way to go, he said, nodding, as if I were an ally. No responsibility, no liability. Just give your opinion and watch them not take it. With a crackle, the pilot's voice broke in over the headsets. Zymos Molecular Manufacturing is dead ahead, he said. You can just see it now. 20 miles in front of us. I saw an isolated cluster of low buildings, silhouetted on the horizon. The PR people in the back all leaned forward. Is that it? Said Crowley. That's all it is. It's bigger than it looks from here, the pilot said. As the helicopter came closer, I could see that the buildings were interlocked, featureless, concrete blocks, all whitewashed. The PR people were so pleased they almost burst into applause. Hey, it's beautiful. Looks like a fucking hospital. Great architecture. It'll photograph great. I said, why will it photograph great? Because it has no projections, the man with a briefcase said. No antennas, no spikes, no things poking up. People are afraid of spikes and antennas. There are studies. But a building that's plain and square like this, and white, perfect color choice associations to Virginal Hospital Cure Pure. A building like this, they don't care. Those environmentalists are fucked, said Crowley with satisfaction. They do medical research here, right? Not exactly. They will when I get through. Trust me. Medical research is the way to go on this. The pilot pointed out the different buildings as he circled them. That first concrete block, that's power. Walkway to that low building, that's the residences. Next door, fab support, labs, whatever. And then the square windowless 3-story one, that's the main fab building. They tell me it's a shell. It's got another building inside it. Then over to the right, that low flat shed, that's external storage and parking. Cars have to be under shade here, or the dashboards buckle. Get a first-degree burn if you touch your steering wheel. It said, and they have residences? The pilot nodded. Yeah, have to. Nearest motel is 161 miles. Over near Reno. So how many people live in this facility? Crowley said. They can take 12, the pilot said. But they've generally got about 5 to 8. Doesn't take a lot to run the place. It's all automated from what I hear. What else do you hear? Not very damn much, the pilot said. They are closed-mouthed about this place. I've never even been inside. Good, said Growly. Let's make sure they keep it that way. The pilot turned the stick in his hand. The helicopter banked and started down. I opened the plastic door in the bubble cockpit and started to get out. It was like stepping into an oven. The blast of heat made me gasp. This is nothing, the pilot shouted over the roar of the blades. This is almost winter. Can't be more than 105. Great, I said, inhaling hot air. I reached in the back for my overnight bag and my laptop. I'd stowed them under the seat of the timid man. I have to take a piss, said Growly, releasing his seatbelt. Dave, said the man with the briefcase in a warning tone. Fuck, it's just for a minute. Dave. An embarrassed glance toward me, then lowering his voice. They said, we don't get out of the helicopter, remember. Ah, hell. I can't wait another hour. Anyway, what's the difference? He gestured toward the surrounding desert. There's nothing the fuck out here for 1,000,000 miles. But Dave, you guys give me a pain. I'm going to pee. Damn it. He headed his bulk up and moved toward the door. I didn't hear the rest of their conversation because by then I had taken off my earphones. Growly was clambering out. I grabbed my bags, turned and moved away, crouched beneath the blades. They cast a flickering shadow on the pad. I came to the edge of the pad, where the concrete ended abruptly in the dirt path that threaded among the clumps of cholla cactus toward the blocky Wright Power building 50 yards away. There was no one to greet me. In fact, no one in sight at all. Looking back, I saw Growly zip up his trousers and climbed back into the helicopter. The pilot pulled the door shut and lifted off, waving to me as he rose into the air. I waved back, then ducked away from the swirl of spitting sand. The helicopter circled once and headed west. The sound faded. The desert was silent except for the hum of the electrical power lines a few hundred yards away. The wind ruffled my shirt, flapped my trousers' legs. I turned in a slow circle, wondering what to do now, and thinking about the words of the PR guy. They said we don't get out of the helicopter, remember. Hey you. I looked back. A door had cracked open in the right power block. A man's head stuck out. He shouted, Are you Jack Foreman? Yes, I said. Well, what the hell are you waiting for? An engraved invitation? Get inside, for Christ's sake. And he slammed the door shut again. That was my welcome to the Zymos fabrication facility. Lugging my bags, I trudged down the dirt path toward the door. Things never turned out the way you expect. I stepped into a small room with dark gray walls on 3 sides. The walls were some smooth material like formica. It took my eyes a moment to adjust to the relative darkness. Then I saw that the 4th wall directly ahead of me was entirely glass, leading to a small compartment and a second glass wall. The glass walls were fitted with folding steel arms adding in metal pressure pads. It looked a little bit like what you expect to see in a bank vault. Beyond the second glass wall, I could see a burly man in blue trousers and a blue work shirt with a Xymos logo on the pocket. He was clearly the plant maintenance engineer. He gestured to me. It's an airlock. Door's automatic. Walk forward. I did. And the nearest glass door hissed open. A red light came on. In the compartment ahead, I saw grill work on floor, ceiling, and both walls. I hesitated. Looks like a fucking toaster, don't it? The man said, grinning. He had some teeth missing. But don't worry. It'll just blow you a little. Come ahead. I stepped into the glass compartment and set my bag on the ground. No, pick the bag up. I picked it up again, immediately. The glass door behind me hissed shut, the steel arms unfolding smoothly. The pressure pads sealed with a thunk. I felt a slight discomfort in my ears as the airlock pressurized. The man in blue said, "You might want to close your eyes." I closed my eyes and immediately felt chilling spray strike my face and body from all sides. My clothes were soaked. I smelled a stinging odor like acetone or nail polish remover. I began to shiver. The liquid was really cold. The first blast of air came from above my head, a roar that quickly built to hurricane intensity. I stiffened my body to steady myself. My clothes flapped and pressed flat against my body. The wind increased, threatening to tear the bag from my hand. Then the air stopped for a moment, and a second blast came upward from the floor. It was disorienting, but it only lasted a few moments. Then with a whoosh, the vacuum pumps kicked in, and I felt a slight ache in my ears as the pressure dropped, like an airplane descending. Then silence. A voice said, "That's it. Come ahead." I opened my eyes. The liquid they'd sprayed on me had evaporated. My clothes were dry. The doors hissed open before me. I stepped out, and the man in blue looked at me quizzically. "Feel okay?" "Yeah, I think so." "No itching?" "No." "Good. We had a few people who were allergic to the stuff. But we've got to do this routine for the clean rooms." I nodded. It was obviously a procedure to remove dust and other contaminants. The dousing fluid was highly volatile, evaporating at room temperature, drawing off microparticles on my body and clothes. The air jets and vacuum completed the scrub. The procedure would remove any loose particles on my body and suck them away. "I'm Vince Reynolds," the man said. But he didn't hold out his hand. "You call me Vince, and you're Jack." I said I was. "Okay, Jack," he said. "They're waiting for you, so let's get started. We got to take precautions because this is an HMF, that's high magnetic field environment, greater than 33 Teslas. So," he picked up a cardboard box. "Better loose your watch." I put the watch in the box. And the belt. I took my belt off put it in the box. Any other jewelry, bracelet, necklace, piercings, decorative pins, or medals? Medic alert? No. How about metal inside your body? Old injury, bullets, shrapnel? No. Any pins for broken arms or legs, hips, or knee replacements? No. Artificial valves, artificial cartilage, vascular pumps, or implants? I said I didn't have any of those things. Well, you're still young, he said. Now, how about in your bag? He made me take everything out and spread it on a table, so he could rummage through it. I had plenty of metal in there. Another belt with a metal buckle, nail clippers, a can of shaving cream, razor and blades, a pocket knife, blue jeans with metal rivets. He took the knife and the belt, but left the rest. You can put your stuff back in the bag, he said. Now here's the deal. Your bag goes to the residence building, but no farther, okay? There's an alarm at the residence door. If you try to take any metal past there, but do me a favor, and don't set it off, okay? 'Cause it shuts down the magnets as a safety procedure. And it takes about 2 minutes to start up again. Pisses the ticks off, especially if they're fabbing at the time. Ruins all their hard work. I said I would try to remember. The rest of your stuff stays right here. He nodded to the wall behind me. I saw a dozen small safes, each with an electronic keypad. You set the combination and lock it up yourself. He turned aside so I could do that. I won't need a watch? He shook his head. We'll get you a watch. What about a belt? We'll get you a belt. And my laptop? I said. It goes in the safe, he said. Unless you want to scrub your hard drive with the magnetic field. I put the laptop in with the rest of my stuff and locked the door. I felt strangely stripped, like a man entering prison. You don't want my shoelaces too? I said, making a joke. Nah, you keep those. So you can strangle yourself if it turns out you need to. Why would I need to? I really couldn't say, Vince shrugged. But these guys working here, let me tell you, they're all fucking crazy. They are making these teeny weeny little things you can't see. Pushing around molecules and shit. Sticking them together. It's real tense and detailed work. And it makes them crazy. Every fucking one of them. Nutty as loons. Come this way. We passed through another set of glass doors. But this time, there was no spray. We entered the power plant. Beneath blue halogen lamps, I saw huge metal tubes 10 feet high and fat ceramic insulators thick as a man's leg. Everything hummed. I felt a distinct vibration in the floor. There were signs all around with jagged red lighting bolts saying warning, lethal electrical currents. You use a lot of power here, I said. Enough for a small town, Vince said. He pointed to one of the signs. Take those warnings seriously. We had problems with fires a while back. Oh? Yeah, got a nest of rats in the building. Buggers kept getting fried. Literally. I hate the smell of burning rat fur, don't you? Never had the experience, I said. Smells like what you'd think. Uh-huh, I said. How did the rats get in? Up through the toilet bowl. I must have looked surprised, because Vince said, "Ah, you don't know that. We must do that all the time. It's just a short shrim for them to get in. Of course, if it happened while you were sitting, it would be a nasty surprise." He gave a short laugh. Problem was the contractor for the building didn't bury the leach field deep enough. Anyhow, rats got in. We've had a few accidents like that since I've been here. Is that right? What kind of accidents? He shrugged. They try to make these buildings perfect, he said, because they are working with such small-sized things. But it's not a perfect world, Jack. Never has been, never will be. I said again, what kind of accidents? By then we had come to the far door with the keypad, and Vince punched in numbers quickly. The door clicked open. All the doors are keyed the same, 060402. Vince pushed the door wide, and we stepped into a covered passageway connecting the power plant to the other buildings. It was stifling not hot here. Despite the roar of the air conditioner, contractor, Vince explained, never balanced the air handlers right. We had him back 5 times to fix it, but this passage is always hot. At the end of the corridor was another door, and Vince had me punch in the code myself. The door clicked open. I faced another airlock, a wall of thick glass with another wall a few feet beyond. And behind that second wall, I saw Ricky Morse, in jeans and a t-shirt, grinning and waving cheerfully to me. His t-shirt said, "Obey me, I am Groot." It was an inside joke in the Unix operating system. It meant the boss. Over the intercom speaker, Ricky said, "I'll take it from here, Vince." Vince waved. "No problem." "You fixed the positive pressure settings?" "Did it an hour ago." "Why?" "It may not be holding in the main lab." "I'll check it again," Vince said. "Maybe we got another leak somewhere." He slapped me on the back, jerked his thumb toward the interior of the building. "Lots of luck in there." Then he turned and walked back the way he came. "It's great to see you," Ricky said. "You know the code to get in." I said I did. He pointed to a keypad. I punched the numbers in. The glass wall slid sideways. I stepped into another narrow space about 4 feet wide, with metal grills on all 4 sides. The wall closed behind me. A fierce blast of air shot up from the floor, puffing up my trousers' legs, ruffling my clothes. Almost immediately, it was followed by a blast of air coming from both sides, then from top, blowing down hard on my hair and shoulders, then a whoosh of vacuum. The glass in front of me slid laterally. I smoothed down my hair and stepped out. "Sorry about that," Ricky shook my hand vigorously. "But at least we don't have to wear bunny suits," he said. I noticed that he looked strong, healthy. The muscles in his forearms were defined. I said, "You look good, Ricky. Working out?" "Oh, you know, not really." "You're pretty cut," I said. I punched him on the shoulder. He grinned. "Just tension on the job." "Did Vince frighten you?" "Not exactly." "He's a little strange," Ricky said. "Vince grew up alone out in the desert with his mother. She died when he was 5. Body was pretty decomposed, when they finally found her. Poor kid. He just didn't know what to do. I guess I'd be strange too, Ricky gave a shrug. But I'm glad you're here, Jack. I was afraid you wouldn't come. Despite Ricky's apparent good health, I was noticing now that he seemed nervous, edgy. He led me briskly down a short hallway. So how's Julia? Broke her arm and hit her head pretty badly. She's in the hospital for observation. But she's going to be alright. Good, that's good. He nodded quickly, continuing down a corridor. Who's taking care of the kids? I told him that my sister was in town. Then you can stay a while? A few days? I said, I guess if you need me for that long. Ordinarily, software consultants don't spend a lot of time on site. One day, maybe two. Not more than that. Ricky glanced over his shoulder at me. Did Julia explain to you about this place? Not really, no. But you knew she was spending a lot of time here. I said, oh, sure, yes. The last few weeks, she came out almost every day on the helicopter. Stayed over a couple of nights, too. I said, I didn't know she took such an interest in manufacturing. Ricky seemed to hesitate a moment. Then he said, well, Jack, this is a whole new thing. He frowned. She really didn't tell you anything. No, not really. Why? He didn't answer. He opened the far door and waved me through. This is our residential module, where everybody sleeps and eats. The air was cool after the passageway. The walls were the same smooth formica material. I heard a low, continuous whoosh of air handlers. A series of doors opened off the hallway. One of them had my name on it, written in marker on a piece of tape. Ricky opened the door. Home sweet home, Jack. The room was monastic. A small bed, a tiny desk, just large enough to hold a workstation, monitor, and a keyboard. Above the bed, a shelf for books and clothes. All the furniture had been coated with smooth, flowing white plastic laminate. There were no nooks or crannies to hold stray particles of dirt. There was no window in the room either, but a liquid crystal screen showed a view of the desert outside. There was a plastic watch and a belt with a plastic buckle on the bed. I put them on. Ricky said, dump your gear, and I'll give you the tour. Still keeping his brisk pace, he led me into a medium-sized lounge with a couch and chairs around a coffee table, and a bulletin board on the wall. All the furniture here was the same flowing plastic laminate. To the right is the kitchen and the rec room, with TV, video games, so forth. We entered the small kitchen. There were two people there, a man and a woman, eating sandwiches standing up. I think you know these guys, Ricky said, grinning. And I did. They had been on my team at Mediatronics. Rosie Castro was dark, thin, exotic looking, and sarcastic. She wore baggy cargo shorts and a t-shirt, tight across her large breasts, which read, You wish independent and rebellious. Rosie had been a Shakespearean scholar at Harvard, before she decided in her words that Shakespeare is fucking dead for fucking centuries. There's nothing new to say. What's the point? She transferred to MIT, became a protege of Robert Kim, working on natural language programming. It turned out she was brilliant at it. And these days, natural language programs were starting to involve distributed processing. Because it turned out people evaluate a sentence in several ways simultaneously. While it is being spoken, they don't wait until it is finished, but rather they from expectations of what is coming. That's the perfect situation for distributed processing, which can work on a problem at several points simultaneously. I said, still wearing those t-shirts, Rosie? At Mediatronics, we'd had some trouble about the way she dressed. Hey, keeps the boys awake, she said, shrugging. Actually, we ignored them. I turned to David Brooks. Stiff, formal, obsessively neat, and almost bald at 28. He blinked behind thick glasses. They are not that good anyway, he said. Rosie stuck her tongue out at him. David was an engineer, and he had an engineer's bluntness and a lack of social skills. He was also full of contradictions. Although he fussed over every detail of his work and appearance, on weekends he raced a dirt bike, often coming back covered in mud. He shook my hand enthusiastically. I'm very glad you're here, Jack. I said, somebody's going to have to tell me why you're all so glad to see me. Rosie said, well, it's because you know more about the multi-agent algorithms that... I'm going to show him around first, Ricky said, interrupting. Then we'll talk. Why? Rosie said. You want it to be a surprise? Head of a surprise, David said. No, not at all, Ricky said, giving them a hard look. I just want Jack to have some background first. I want to go over that with him. David looked at his watch. Well, how much time do you think that will take? Because I figured we've got... I said, let me show him around, for Christ's sake. Ricky was almost snarling. I was surprised. I'd never seen him lose his temper before. But apparently they had. Okay, Ricky. Hey, you're the boss, Ricky. That's right, I am, Ricky said, still visibly angry. And by the way, your break ended 10 minutes ago. So let's get back to work. He looked into the adjoining game room, where the others, fixing the perimeter sensors. You mean they're outside? No. They're in the utility room. Bobby thinks there's a calibration problem with the sensors units. Great. Did anybody tell Vince? No, it's software. Bobby's taking care of it. It was at that point that my cell phone beeped. I was surprised. Pulled it out of my pocket. I turned to the others. Cell phones work? Yeah, Ricky said. We're right here. He went back to his argument with David and Rosie. I stepped into the corridor and got my messages. There was only one, from the hospital, about Julia. We understand you are Miss Foreman's husband, and if you could call us, please, as soon as possible. Then an extension for Dr. Rana. I dialed back at once. The switchboard put me through. ICU. I asked for Dr. Anna and waited until he came on. I said, "This is Jack Foreman, Julia Foreman's husband." "Oh yes, Mr. Foreman." A pleasant, melodic voice. "Thank you for calling back. I understand you accompanied your wife to the hospital last night." "Yes." "Well then, you know the seriousness of her injuries. Or should I say, her potential injuries. We really do feel that she needs to have a thorough workup for a cervical fracture and for a subdural hematoma. And she needs a pelvic fracture workup as well." "Yes," I said. "That's what I was told last night. Is there a problem?" "Actually, there is. Your wife is refusing treatment." "She is?" "Last night she allowed us to take x-rays and to set the fractures in her wrist. We've explained to her that x-rays are limited in what we can see, and that is quite important for her to have an MRI. But she is refusing that." I said, "Why?" She says she doesn't need it." "Of course she needs it," I said. "Yes, she does, Mr. Foreman," Rana said. "I don't want to alarm you, but the concern with pelvic fracture is massive hemorrhaging into the abdomen and, well, bleeding to death. It can happen very quickly, and..." "What do you want me to do?" "We'd like you to talk to her, of course. Put her on." "Unfortunately, she's gone for some additional x-rays just now. Is there a number where you can be reached? Your cell phone? All right. One other thing, Mr. Foreman. We weren't able to take a psychiatric history from your wife." "Why is that?" "She refuses to talk about it." "I'm referring to drugs and history of behavioral disorders, that kind of thing. Can you shed any light in that area?" "I'll try." "I don't want to alarm you, but your wife has been, well, a bit on the irrational side. At times, almost delusional. She's been under a lot of stress lately," I said. "Yes, I am sure that contributes," Dr. Rana said smoothly. "And she has suffered a severe head injury, which we need to investigate further. I don't want to alarm you, but frankly, it was the opinion of the psychiatric consult that your wife was suffering from a bipolar disorder, or a drug disorder, or both." "I see. And of course, such questions naturally arise in the context of a single-car automobile accident." He meant that the accident might be a suicidal attempt. I didn't think that was likely. "I have no knowledge of my wife taking drugs," I said. "But I have been concerned about her behavior for, a few weeks now." Ricky came over and stood by me impatiently. I put my hand over the phone. "It's about Julia." He nodded and glanced at his watch, raised his eyebrows. I thought it was pretty odd that he would push me when I was talking to the hospital about my wife and his immediate superior. The doctor rambled on for a while, and I did my best to answer his questions, but the fact was, I didn't have any information that could help him. He said he would have Julia call when she got back, and I said I would wait for the call. I flipped the phone closed. Ricky said, "Okay, fine. Sorry to rush you, Jack. But I've got a lot to show you." "Is there a time problem?" I said. "I don't know. Maybe." I started to ask what he meant by that, but he was already leading me forward. Walking quickly, we left the residential area, passing through another glass door, and down another passageway. This passage, I noticed, was tightly sealed. We walked along a glass walkway suspended above the floor. The glass had little perforations, and beneath was a series of vacuum ducts for suctions. By now, I was growing accustomed to the constant hiss of the air handlers. Midway down the corridor was another pair of glass doors. We had to go through them one at a time. They parted as we went through and closed behind us. Continuing on, I again had the distinct feeling of being in a prison, of going through a succession of barred gates, going deeper and deeper into something. It might be all high-tech and shiny glass walls, but it was still a prison. Day 6, 8:12 a.m. We came into a large room marked Utility, and beneath it, Mulstock, Fabstock, Feedstock. The walls and ceilings were covered with a familiar smooth plastic laminate. Large laminated containers were stacked on the floor. Off to the right, I saw a row of big stainless steel kettles, sunk below ground, with lots of piping and valves surrounding them. And coming up to the first floor level, it looked exactly like a microbrewery. And I was about to ask Ricky about it when he said, "So there you are." Looking at a junction box beneath a monitor screen were 3 more members of my old team. They looked slightly guilty as we came up, like kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Of course, Bobby Lembeck was their leader. At 35, Bobby now supervised more code than he wrote, but he could still write when he wanted to. As always, he was wearing faded jeans and a Ghost in the Shell t-shirt. His ubiquitous Walkman clamped to his waist. Then there was Mei Shang, beautiful and delicate, about as different from Rosie Castro as any woman could be. Mei had worked as a field biologist in Sichuan, studying the golden snub-nosed monkey, before turning to programming in her mid-20s. The time in the field, as well as her natural inclinations, led her to be almost silent. Mei said very little, moved almost soundlessly, and never raised her voice. But she never lost an argument either. Like many field biologists, she had developed the uncanny ability to slip into the background, to become unnoticed, almost to vanish. And finally, Charlie Davenport, grumpy, rumpled, and already overweight at 30. Slow and lumbering, he looked as if he had slept in his clothes. And in fact, he often did. After the marathon programming session, Charlie had worked under John Holland in Chicago and Dorian Farmer at Los Alamos. He was an expert in genetic algorithms, the kind of programming that mimicked natural selection, to hone answers. But he was an irritating personality. He hummed, he snorted, talked to himself, and farted with noisy abandon. The group only tolerated him because he was so talented. Does it really take 3 people to do this? Ricky said, after I'd shaking hands all around. Yes, Bobby said. It does take 3 people. El Ruto, because it's complicated. Why? And don't call me El Ruto. I obey, Mr. Root. Just get on with it. Well, Bobby said, I started to check the sensors after this morning's episode, and it looks to me like they're miscalibrated. But since nobody is going outside, the question is whether we're reading them wrong or whatever the sensors themselves are faulty or just scaled wrong on the equipment in here. May knows these sensors. She used them in China. I'm making code revisions now. And Charlie is here because he won't go away and leave us alone. Shit, I have better things to do, Charlie said. But I wrote the algorithms that controls the sensors. And we need to optimize the sensors code after they're done. I'm just waiting until they stop screwing around. Then I'll optimize. He looked pointedly at Bobby. None of these guys can optimize with a damn. May said, Bobby can. Yeah, if you give him 6 months, maybe. Children, Ricky said. Let's not make a scene in front of our guests. I smiled blandly. The truth was, I hadn't been paying attention to what they were saying. I was just watching them. These were 3 of my best programmers, and when they had worked for me, they had been self-assured to the point of arrogance. But now I was struck by how nervous the group was. They were all on edge, bickering, jumpy, and, thinking back, I realized that Rosie and David had been on edge too. Charlie started humming in that irritating way of his. Cry, oh Christ, Bobby Lembick said. Would you tell him to shut up? Ricky said. Charlie, you know we've talked about the humming. Charlie continued to hum. Charlie gave a long theatrical sigh. He stopped humming. Thank you, Bobby said. Charlie rolled his eyes and looked at the ceiling. All right, Ricky said. Finish up quickly and get back to your stations. Okay, fine. I want everybody in place as soon as possible. Okay, Bobby said. I'm serious. In your places. For Christ's sake, Ricky. Okay. Now, will you stop talking and let us work? Leaving the group behind, Ricky took me across the floor to a small room. I said, Ricky, these kids aren't the way they were when they worked for me. I know. Everybody's a little uptight right now. And why is that? Because of what's going on here. And what is going on here? He stopped before a small cubicle on the other side of the room. Julia couldn't tell you because it was classified. He touched the door with a keycard. I said, classified? Medical imaging is classified? The door latch clicked open, and we went inside. The door closed behind us. I saw a table, 2 chairs, a computer monitor, and a keyboard. Ricky sat down and immediately started typing. The medical imaging project was just an afterthought, he said. A minor commercial application of the technology we are already developing. Which is military. Zymos is doing military work? Yes, under contract, he paused. 2 years ago, the Department of Defense realized from their experience in Bosnia that there was enormous value to robot aircraft that could fly overhead and transmit battlefield images in real time. The Pentagon knew that there would be more and more sophisticated uses for these flying cameras in future wars. You could use them to spot the locations of enemy troops, even when they were hidden in jungle or in buildings. You could use them to control laser-guided rocket fire, or to identify the locations of friendly troops, and so on. Commanders on the ground could call up the images they wanted in the spectra they wanted. Visible, infrared, UV, whatever. Real-time imaging was going to be a very powerful tool in future warfare. Okay. But obviously, Ricky said, these robot cameras were vulnerable. You could shoot them down like pigeons. The Pentagon wanted a camera that couldn't be shot down. They imagined something very small, maybe the size of a dragonfly, a target too small to hit. But there were problems with power supply, with small control surfaces, and with resolutions using such small lens. They needed a bigger lens. I nodded. And so you thought of a swarm of nanocomponents. That's right, Ricky pointed to the screen, where a cluster of black spots wheeled and turned in the air like birds. A cloud of components would allow you to make a camera with as large a lens as you wanted, and it couldn't be shut down because a bullet would just pass through the cloud. Furthermore, you could disperse the cloud the way a flock of birds disperses with a gunshot. Then the camera would be invisible until it reformed again. So it seemed an ideal solution. The Pentagon gave us 3 years of DARPA funding, and we set out to make the camera. It was of course immediately obvious that we had a problem with distributed intelligence. I was familiar with the problem. The nanoparticles in the cloud had to be endowed with a rudimentary intelligence, so that they could interact with each other to form a flock that wheeled in the air. Such coordinated activity might look pretty intelligent, but it could even when the individuals making up the flock were rather stupid. After all, birds and fish could do it, and they weren't the brightest creatures on the planet. Most people watching a flock of birds or a school of fish assumed there was a leader, and that all the other animals followed the leader. That was because human beings, like most social mammals, had group leaders. But birds and fish had no leaders. Their groups weren't organized that way. Careful study of flocking behavior, frame by frame, video analysis showed that, in fact, there was no leader. Birds and fish responded to a few simple stimuli among themselves, and the result was coordinated behavior. but nobody was controlling it. Nobody was leading it. Nobody was directing it. Nor were individual birds genetically programmed for flocking behavior. Flocking was not hardwired. There was nothing in the bird brain that said, when thus and such happens, start flocking. On the contrary, flocking simply emerged within the group as a result of much simpler, low-level rules. Rules like, stay close to the birds nearest you, but don't bump into them. From those rules, the entire group flocked in smooth coordination. Because flocking arose from low-level rules, it was called emergent behavior. The technical definition of emergent behavior was behavior that occurred in a group but was not programmed into any member of the group. Emergent behavior could occur in any populations, including a computer population, or a robot population, or a nanoswarm. I said to Ricky, your problem was emergent behavior in the swarm. Exactly. It was unpredictable, to put it mildly. In recent decades, this notion of emergent group behavior had caused a minor revolution in computer science. What that meant for programmers was that you could lay down rules of behavior for individuals, agents, but not for the agents acting together. Individual agents, whether programming modules or processors, or as in this case, actual micro-robots, could be programmed to cooperate under certain circumstances and to compete under other circumstances. They could be given goals. They could be instructed to pursue their goals with single-minded intensity, or to be available to help other agents. But the results of these interactions could not be programmed. It just emerged with often surprising outcomes. In a way, this was very exciting. For the first time, a program could produce results that absolutely could not be predicted by the programmer. These programs behaved more like living organisms than man-made automatons that excited programmers, but it frustrated them too, because the program's emergent behavior was erratic. Sometimes competing agents fought to a standstill, and the program failed to accomplish anything. Sometimes agents were so influenced by one another that they lost track of their goal and did something else instead. In that sense, the program was very childlike, unpredictable, and easily distracted. As one programmer put it, trying to program distributed intelligence is like telling a 5-year-old kid to go to his room and change his clothes. He may do that, but he is equally likely to do something else and never return. Because these programs behaved in a lifelike way, programmers began to draw analogies to the behavior of real organisms in the real world. In fact, they began to model the behavior of actual organisms as a way to get something control over program outcomes. So you had programmers studying ant swarming, or termite mounding, or bee dancing, in order to write programs to control airplane landing schedules, or package routing, or language translation. These programs often worked beautifully, but they could still go awry, particularly in circumstances changed drastically. Then they would lose their goals. That was why I began 5 years ago to model predator-prey relationships as a way to keep goals fixed. Because hungry predators weren't distracted, circumstances might force them to improvise their methods, and they might try many times before they succeeded, but they didn't lose track of their goal. So I became an expert in predator-prey relationships. I knew about packs of hyenas, African hunting dogs, stalking lionesses, and attacking columns of army ants. My team had studied the literature from the field biologist, and we had generalized those findings into a program module called Pred-Prey, which could be used to control any system of agents and make it behavior purposeful, to make the program seek a goal. Looking at Ricky's screen, the coordinated units moving smoothly as they turned through the air, I said, "You used Pred-Prey to program your individual units?" "Right. We used those rules. "Well, the behavior looks pretty good to me," I said, watching the screen. "Why is there a problem?" "We are not sure." "What does that mean?" "It means we know there's a problem, but we're not sure what's causing it. Whether the problem is programming or something else." "Something else? Like what?" I frowned. "I don't get it, Ricky. This is just a cluster of microbots. You can make it do whatever you want. If the programming's not right, you adjust it. What don't I understand?" Ricky looked at me uneasily. He pushed his chair away from the table and stood. "Let me show you how we manufacture these agents," he said. "Then you'll understand the situation better." Having watched Julia's demo tape, I was immensely curious to see what he showed me next. Because many people I respected thought molecular manufacturing was impossible. One of the major theoretical objections was the time it would take to build a working molecule. To look at all the nano-assembly line would have to be far more efficient than anything previously known in human manufacturing. Basically, all man-made assembly lines ran at roughly the same speed. They could add 1 part per second. An automobile, for example, had a few thousand parts. You could build a car in a matter of hours. A commercial aircraft had 6 million parts and took several months to build. But a typical manufactured molecule consisted of 10 to the 25th parts. That was 10 quadrillion parts as a particle matter. This number was unimaginably large. The human brain couldn't comprehend it. But calculations showed that even if you could assemble at the rate of 1 million parts per second, the time to complete one molecule would still be 3,000 trillion years longer than the known age of the universe. and that was a problem. It was known as the build time problem. I said to Ricky, if you're doing industrial manufacturing, we are. Then you must have solved the build time problem. We have. How? Just right. Most scientists assumed this problem would be solved by building from larger subunits, molecular fragments consisting of billions of atoms. That would cut the assembly time down to a couple of years. Then with partial self-assembly, you might get the time down to several hours, perhaps even 1 hour. But even with further refinements, it remains a theoretical challenge to produce commercial quantities of product, because the goal was not to manufacture a single molecule in an hour. The goal was to manufacture several pounds of molecules in an hour. No one had ever figured out how to do that. We passed a couple of laboratories, including one that looked like a standard microbiology lab or genetics lab. I saw May standing in that lab, puttering around. I started to ask Ricky why he had a microbiology lab here, but he brushed my questions aside. He was impatient now, in a hurry. I saw him glance at his watch. Directly ahead was a final glass airlock. Stenciled on the glass door was microfabrication. Ricky waved me in. One at a time, he said. That's all the systems allows. I stepped in. The doors hissed shut behind me. The pressure pads again thunking shut. Another blast of air. From below, from the sides, from above. By now, I was getting used to it. The second door opened, and I walked forward down another short corridor. Opening into a large room beyond, I saw a bright, shining white light, so bright it hurt my eyes. Ricky came after me, talking as we walked. But I don't remember what he said. I couldn't focus on his words. I just stared, because by now I was inside the main fab building. A huge windowless space, like a giant hangar, 3 stories high, and within this hangar stood a structure of immense complexity that seemed to hang in mid-air, glowing like a jewel. Day 6, 9:12 a.m. At first, it was hard to understand what I was seeing. It looked like an enormous glowing octopus rising above me, with glinting faceted arms extending outward in all directions, throwing complex reflections and bands of color onto the outer walls. Except this octopus had multiple layers of arms. One layer was low, just a foot above the floor. A second was at chest level. The third and fourth layers were higher above my head, and they all glowed, sparkled brilliantly. I blinked, dazzled. I began to make out the details. The octopus was contained within an irregular 3-story framework, built entirely of modular glass cubes. Floors, walls, ceilings, staircases, everything was cubes. But the arrangement was haphazard, as if someone had dumped a mound of giant transparent sugar cubes in the center of the room. Within this cluster of cubes The arms of the octopus snaked off in all directions. The whole thing was held up by a web of black anodized struts and connectors, but they were obscured by the reflections, which is why the octopus seemed to hang in mid-air. Ricky grinned. Convergent assembly. The architecture is fractal. Neat, huh? I nodded slowly. I was seeing more details. What I had seen as an octopus was actually a branching tree structure. A central square conduit ran vertically through the center of the room, with smaller pipes branching off on all sides. From these branches, even smaller pipes branched off in turn, and smaller ones still. The smallest of the pipes were pencil thin. Everything gleamed as if it were mirrored. Why is it so bright? The glass has diamondoid coating, he said. At the molecular level, glass is like Swiss cheese, full of holes, and of course it's a liquid, so atoms just pass right through it. So you coat the glass? Right, have to. Within this shining forest of branching glass, David and Rosie moved, making notes, adjusting valves, consulting handheld computers. I understood that I was looking at a massively parallel assembly line. Small fragments of molecules were introduced into the smallest pipes, and atoms were added to them. When that was finished, they moved into the next largest pipes, where more atoms were added. In this way, molecules moved progressively towards the center of the structure until assembly was completed, and they were discharged into the central pipe. Exactly right, Vicky said. This is just the same as an automobile assembly lines, except that it's on a molecular scale. Molecules start at the ends and come down the line to the center. We stick on a protein sequence here, a methyl group there, just the way they stick doors and wheels on a car. At the end of the line, off rolls a new custom-made molecular structure built to our specifications, and the different arms make different molecules. That's why the arms look different in several places. The octopus arm passed through a steel tunnel reinforced with heavy bolts for vacuum ducting. In other places, a cube was covered with quilted silver insulation, and I saw liquid nitrogen tanks nearby. Extremely low temperatures were generated in that section. Those are our cryogenic rooms, Ricky said. We don't go very low, maybe -70 centigrade max. Come on, I'll show you. He led me through the complex, following glass walkways that threaded among the arms. In some places, a short staircase enabled us to step over the lowest arms. Ricky chatted continuously about technical details. Vacuum jacketed hoses, meta-phase separators, globe check valves. When we reached the insulated cube, he opened the heavy doors to reveal a small room with a second room adjacent. It looked like a pair of meat lockers. Small glass windows were set in each door. At the moment, everything was at room temperature. You can have two different temps here, he said. One from the other, if you want, but it's usually automated. Ricky led me back outside, glancing at his watch. As he did so, I said, "Are we late for an appointment?" "What? No, nothing like that." Nearby, 2 cubes were actually solid metal rooms, with thick electrical cables running inside. I said, "Those your magnet rooms?" "That's right," Ricky said. "We've got pulsed field magnets generating 33 Teslas in the core. That's something like 1,000,000 times the magnetic field of the Earth." With a grunt, he pushed open the steel door to the nearest magnet room. I saw a large donut-shaped object, about 6 feet in diameter, with a hole in the center about an inch wide. The donut was completely encased in tubing and plastic insulation. Heavy steel bolts running from top to bottom held the jacketing in place. A lot of cooling for this puppy, I can tell you. And a lot of power, 15 kilovolts. Takes a full minute load time for the capacitors. And of course we can only pulse it. If we turn it on continuously, it'll explode, ripped apart by the field it generates. He pointed to the base of the magnet, where there was a round push button at knee level. "That's the safety cutoff there," he said, "just in case. Hit it with your knee if your hands are full." I said, "So you used high magnetic fields to do part of your assembly?" But Ricky had already turned and headed out the door. Again, glancing at his watch, I hurried after him. "Ricky, I have more to show you," he said. "We are getting to the end." "Ricky, this is all very impressive," I said, gesturing to the glowing arms. "But most of your assembly line is running at room temperature. No vacuum, no cryo, no mag field." "Right, no special conditions. How is that possible?" He shrugged. "The assemblers don't need it." "The assemblers?" I said. "Are you telling me you've got molecular assemblers on this line?" "Yes, of course." "Assemblers are doing your fabrications for you?" "Of course. I thought you understood that." "No, Ricky," I said. "I didn't understand that at all. And I don't like to be lied to." He got a wounded look on his face. "I'm not lying." But I was certain that he was. One of the first things scientists learned about molecular manufacturing was how phenomenally difficult it was to carry out. In 1990, some IBM researchers pushed xenon atoms around on a nickel plate until they formed the letters IBM in the shape of the company logo. The entire logo was 1/10 billionth of an inch long and could only be seen through an electron microscope. But it made a striking visual, and it got a lot of publicity. IBM allowed people to think it was a proof of concept, the opening of a door to molecular manufacturing. But it was more of a stunt than anything else, because pushing individual atoms into a specific arrangement was slow, painstaking, and expensive work. It took the IBM researchers a whole day to move 35 atoms. Nobody believed you could create a whole new technology in this way. Instead, most people believed that nano engineers would eventually find a way to build assemblers, miniature molecular machines that could turn out specific molecules, the way a ball bearing machine turned out ball bearings. The new technology would rely on molecular machines to make molecular products. It was a nice concept, but the practical problems were daunting, because assemblers were vastly more complicated than the molecules they made. Attempts to design and build them had been difficult from the outset. To my knowledge, no laboratory anywhere in the world had actually done it. But now Ricky was telling me, quite casually, that Zymos could build molecular assemblers that were now turning out molecules for the company. And I didn't believe him. I had worked all my life in technology, and I had developed a feel for what was possible. This kind of giant leap forward just didn't happen. It never did. Technologies were a form of knowledge, and like all knowledge, technologies grew, evolved, matured. To believe otherwise was to believe that the Wright brothers could build a rocket and fly to the moon instead of flying 300 feet over sand dunes at Kitty Hawk. Nanotechnology was still at the Kitty Hawk stage. Come on, Ricky, I said. How are you really doing this? The technical details aren't that important, Jack. What fresh bullshit is this? Of course they're important. Jack, he said, giving me his most winning smile. Do you really think I'm lying to you? Yes, Ricky, I said. I do. I looked up at the octopus arms all around me, surrounded by glass. I saw my own reflection dozens of times in the surfaces around me. It was confusing, disorienting. Trying to gather my thoughts, I looked down at my feet, and I noticed that even though we had been walking on glass walkways, some sections of the ground floor were glass as well. One section was nearby. I walked towards it. Through the glass, I could see steel ducting and pipes below ground level. One set of pipes caught my eye, because they ran from the storage room to a nearby glass cube, at which point they emerged from the floor and headed upward, branching into the smallest tubes. That I assumed was the feedstock, the slush of raw organic material that would be transformed on the assembly line into finished molecules. Looking back down at the floor, I followed the pipes backwards to the place where they entered from the adjacent room. This junction was glass. 2. I could see the curved steel underbellies of the big kettles I noticed earlier. The tanks that I had thought were a microbrewery, because that's certainly what it had looked like. A small brewery, machinery for controlled fermentations, for controlled microbial growth. And then I realized what it really was. I said, "You son of a bitch." Ricky smiled again and shrugged. "Hey," he said, "it gets the job done." Those kettles in the next room were indeed tanks for controlled microbial growth. But Ricky wasn't making beer. He was making microbes, and I had no doubt about the reason why. Unable to construct genuine nanoassemblers, Zymos was using bacteria to crank out their molecules. This was genetic engineering, not nanotechnology. Well, not exactly, Ricky said, when I told him what I thought. But I admit, we are using a hybrid technology. Not much of a surprise in any case, is it? That was true. For at least 10 years, observers had been predicting that genetic engineering, computer programming, and nanotechnology would eventually merge. They were all involved with similar and interconnected activities. There wasn't that much difference between using a computer to decode part of the bacterial genome and using a computer to help you insert new genes into the bacteria to make new proteins. And there wasn't much difference between creating a new bacteria to spit out, say, insulin molecules, and creating a man-made micromechanical assembler to spit out new molecules. It was all happening at the molecular level. It was all the same challenge of imposing human design on extremely complex systems. And molecular design was nothing if not complicated. You could think of a molecule as a series of atoms snapped together like Lego blocks, one after another. But the image was misleading, because unlike a Lego set, atoms couldn't be snapped together in any arrangement you like. An inserted atom was subject to powerful local forces, magnetic and chemical, with frequently undesirable results. The atom might be kicked out of its positions. It might remain, but at an awkward angle. It might even fold the entire molecular up in knots. As a result, molecular manufacturing was an exercise in the art of the possible, of substituting atoms and groups of atoms to make equivalent structures that would work in the desired way. In the face of all this difficulty, it was impossible to ignore the fact that there are already existed proven molecular factories capable of turning out large numbers of molecules. They were called cells. Unfortunately, cellular manufacturing can take us only so far, Ricky said. We harvest the substrate molecules, the raw materials, and then we build on them with nano-engineering procedures. So we do a little of both. I pointed down at the tanks. What cells are you growing? Theta D5972, he said, which is a strain of E. coli. E. coli was a common bacterium found pretty much everywhere in the natural environment, even in the human intestines. I said, did anyone think it might not be a good idea to use cells that can live inside human beings? Not really, he said. Frankly, that wasn't a consideration. We just wanted a well-studied cell that was fully documented in the literature. We chose an industrial standard. Anyway, Ricky continued, I don't think it's a problem, Jack. It won't thrive in the human gut. Theta D is optimized for a variety of nutrient sources to make it cheap to grow in the laboratory. In fact, I think it can even grow on garbage. So that's how you get your molecules. Bacteria makes them for you. Yes, he said. That's how we get the primary molecules. We harvest 27 primary molecules. They fit together in relatively high temperature settings. where the atoms are more active and mix quickly. That's why it's hot in here. Yes, reaction efficiency as a maximum at 147 degrees Fahrenheit. So we work there. That's where we get the fastest combinations rate. But these molecules will combat at much lower temperatures, even around 35, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll get a certain amount of molecular combinations. And you don't need other conditions, I said. Vacuum, pressure, high magnetic fields. Ricky shook his head. No, Jack. We maintain those conditions to speed up assembly, but it's not strictly necessary. The design is really elegant. The component molecules go together quite easily, and these component molecules combine to form your final assembler, which then assembles the molecules we want. Yes. It was a clever solution, creating his assemblers with bacteria. But Ricky was telling me the components assembled themselves, almost automatically, with nothing required but high temperature. What then was this complex glass building used for? Efficiency and process separations, Ricky said. We can build as many as 9 assemblers simultaneously in the different arms. And where do the assemblers make the final molecules? In the same structure. But first, we apply them. I shook my head. I wasn't familiar with the term reapply. It's a little refinement we developed here. We are patenting it. You see, our systems worked perfectly right from the start, but our yields were extremely low. We were harvesting 0.5 gram of finished molecules an hour. At that rate, it would take several days to make a single camera. We couldn't figure out what the problem was. The late assembly in the arms is done in gas phase. It turned out that the molecular assemblers were heavy and tended to sink to the bottom. The bacteria settled on a layer above them, releasing component molecules that were lighter still and floated higher. So the assemblers were making very little contact with the molecules they were meant to assemble. We tried mixing technologies, but they didn't help. So you did what? We modified the assembler designs to provide a lipotropic base that would attach to the surface of the bacteria, that brought the assemblers into better contact with the component molecules. And immediately our yields jumped 5 orders of magnitude. And now your assemblers sit on the bacteria. Correct. They attach to the outer cell membrane. At a nearby workstation, Ricky punched up the assembler design on the flat panel display. The assembler looked like a sort of pinwheel, a series of spiral arms going off in different directions, in a dense knot of atoms in the center. It's fractal, as I said, he said. So it looks sort of the same at smaller orders of magnitude, he laughed. Like the old joke, turtles all the way down. He pressed more keys. Anyway, here's the attached configurations. The screen now showed the assembler adhering to a much larger pill-shaped object, like a pinwheel attached to a submarine. That's the Theta D bacterium, Ricky said, with the assembler on it. As I watched, several more pinwheels attached themselves, And these assemblers make the actual camera units. Correct. He typed again. I saw a new image. This is our target micro machine, the final camera. You've seen the Bloodstream version. This is the Pentagon version, quite a bit larger and designed to be airborne. What you're looking at is a molecular helicopter. Where's the propeller? I said. Hasn't got one. The machine uses those little round protrusions you see there, stuck in at angles. They're motors. The machines actually maneuver by climbing the viscosity of the air. Climbing the what? Viscosity of the air, he smiled. Micro machine level, remember. It's a whole new world, Jack. However, innovative the design, Ricky was still bound by the Pentagon's engineering specs for the product, and the product wasn't performing. Yes, they had built a camera that couldn't be shut down, and it transmitted images very well. Ricky explained it worked perfectly during tests indoors, but outside, even a modest breeze tended to blow it away like a cloud of dust it was. The engineering team at Xymos was attempting to modify the units to increase mobility, but so far without success. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense decided the design constraints were unbeatable and had backed away from the whole nano concept. The Xymos contract had been cancelled. DoD was going to pull funding in another 6 weeks. I said, that's why Julia was so desperate for venture capital these last few weeks. Right, Ricky said. Frankly, this whole company could go belly up before Christmas. Unless you fix the units, so they can work in wind rate. Right, I said. Ricky, I'm a programmer. I can't help you with your agent mobility problems. That's an issue of molecular design. It's engineering. It's not my area. I know that, he paused, frowned. But actually, we think the program code may be involved in the solution. The code? Involved in the solution to what? Jack, I have to be frank with you. We've made a mistake, he said. But it's not our fault. I swear to you, it wasn't us. It was the contractors. He stood up. Come on, I'll show you. Walking briskly, he led me to the far side of the facility, where I saw an open yellow elevator cage mounted on the wall. It was a small elevator, and I was uncomfortable because it was open. I averted my eyes. Ricky said, Don't like heights? Can't stand them. Well, it's better than walking. He pointed off to one side, where an iron ladder ran up the wall to the ceiling. When the elevator goes out, we have to climb up that. I shuddered. Not me. We rode the elevator all the way up to the ceiling, 3 stories above the ground. Hanging beneath the ceilings was a tangle of ducts and conduits, and a network of mesh walkways to enable workers to service them. I hated the mesh, because I could see through it to the floor, far below. I tried not to look down. We had to duck repeatedly beneath the low-hanging pipes. Ricky shouted over the roar of the equipment. Everything's up here, he yelled, pointing in various directions. Air handlers over there. Water tank for the fire sprinkler systems there. Electrical junction boxes there. This is really the center of everything. Ricky continued down the walkway, finally stopping beside a big air vent, about 3 feet in diameter, that went into the outer wall. This is vent 3, he said, leaning close to my ear. It's one of 4 main vents that exhaust air to the outside. Now you see those slots along the vent, and the square boxes that sit in the slots. Those are filter packs. We have microfilters arranged in successive layers to prevent any external contaminations from the facility. I see them. You see them now, Ricky said. Unfortunately, the contractor forgot to install the filters in this particular vent. In fact, they didn't even cut the slots, so the building inspectors never realized anything was missing. They signed off on the building. We started working here, and we vented unfiltered air to the outside environment. For how long? Ricky bit his lip. 3 weeks. And you were at full productions? He nodded. We figured we vented approximately 25 kilos of contaminants. And what were the contaminants? A little of everything. We're not sure of exactly what. So you vented E. coli assemblers, finished molecules, everything. Correct. But we don't know what proportions. Do the proportions matter? They might, yes. Ricky was increasingly edgy. As he told me all this, biting his lip, scratching his head, avoiding my eyes. I didn't get it. In the annals of industrial pollutions, 50 pounds of contaminations was trivial. 50 pounds of material would fit comfortably in a gym bag, unless it was highly toxic or radioactive, and it wasn't. Such a small quantity simply didn't matter. I said, Ricky, so what? Those particles were scattered by the wind across hundreds of miles of desert. They'll decay from sunlight and cosmic radiation. They'll break up, decompose in a few hours or days. They're gone, right? Ricky shrugged. Actually, Jack, that's not what... It was at that moment that the alarm went off. It was a quiet alarm. Just a soft, insistent pinging that made Ricky jump. He ran down the hallway, feet clanging on the metal towards a computer workstation mounted on the wall. There was a status window in the corner of the monitor. It was flashing red. BV90 entry. I said, what does that mean? Something set off the perimeter alarms. He unclipped his radio and said, Vince, lock us down. The radio crackled. We're locked down, Ricky. Raise positive pressure. It's up 5 pounds above baseline. You want more? No, leave it there. Do we have visualizations? Not yet. Shit. Ricky stuck the radio back on his belt. Began typing quickly. The workstation screen divided into a half-dozen small images from security cameras mounted all around the facility. Some showed the surrounding desert from high views, looking down from rooftops. Others were ground views. The cameras panned slowly. I saw nothing, just desert scrub, and occasional clumps of cactus. False alarm, I said. Ricky shook his head. I wish. I said, I don't see anything. It'll take a minute to find it. Find what? That. He pointed to the monitor and bit his lip. I saw what appeared to be a small, swirling cloud of dark particles. It looked like a dust devil. One of those tiny tornado-like clusters that moved over the ground, spun by convection currents rising from the hot desert floor. Except that this cloud was black, and it had some definition. It seemed to be pinched in the middle, making it look a bit like an old-fashioned Coke bottle. But it didn't hold that shape consistently. The appearance kept shifting, transforming. "Ricky," I said, "what are we looking at?" "I was hoping you'd tell me." "It looks like an agent swarm." "Is that your camera swarm?" "No, it's something else." "How do you know?" "Because we can't control it. It doesn't respond to our radio signals." "You've tried?" "Yes, we've tried to make contact with it for almost 2 weeks," he said. "It's generating an electrical field that we can measure, but for some reason we can't interact with it." "So you have a runaway swarm?" "Yes." "Acting autonomously?" "Yes." "And this has been going on for days, about 10 days. 10 days, I frowned. "How is that possible, Ricky?" "The swarm's a collection of micro-robotic machines." "Why haven't they decayed or run out of power? And why exactly can't you control them?" Because if they have the ability to swarm, then there's some electrically mediated interactions among them. So you should be able to take control of the swarm, or at least disrupt it." "All true," Ricky said, "except we can't. And we've tried everything we can think of." He was focused on the screen, watching intensely. "That cloud is independent of us. Period. And so you brought me out here." "To help us get the fucking thing back," Ricky said.